Okay, ready to dive into another fascinating historical figure.
Always.
So picture this. Um, you ace every exam. Like seriously, you set records. You even meet the king because you're that brilliant. But then, years later, your name becomes a byword for traitor. Talk about a fall from grace.
Yeah, you're talking about Vidkun Quisling. His name, it's practically synonymous with betrayal.
Exactly. And today we're going to use the Stuff You Missed in History Class podcast to help us dig into Quisling's life. It really is a story of stark contrasts, starting with idealism and ending in, well, infamy.
What makes Quisling's story so interesting is that it's not just a simple case of wartime bad guy. To
Right.
really grasp how he went from this celebrated scholar to this despised collaborator, I think we have to go back, way back to his beginnings, like long before he ever met Hitler.
Okay, so let's rewind the tape. What was young Quisling like? I mean, paint us a picture.
From what we know, people who knew him way back when, they described him as intelligent, maybe a bit shy, but definitely idealistic. And academically, he was a superstar. Ah, okay.
Like he topped the entrance exams for War College. I think there was something like almost 250 candidates. And then not only did he graduate from the Norwegian Military Academy, but get this, he achieved the highest marks in the entire history of the academy.
Wow. Talk about setting the bar really, really high. So he seemed, I mean, at least initially, destined for greatness.
Yeah, it certainly seemed that way.
Right.
And it wasn't just academics either. He served in Russia. This was during the famine of 1921. He worked with Fridtjof Nansen, the famous polar explorer and humanitarian. They were providing relief to, people who were starving.
Right.
And he actually met Lenin. He represented Norway's interests in, a pretty volatile Russia right after the revolution.
So all of that, the military success, the humanitarian work, even, meeting with world leaders, you'd think that would solidify his commitment to Norway, to serving his country.
You would think so, right?
Yeah. But here's the thing. It's also during this time that we start to see those contradictions. Like, alongside this idealism and intelligence, you see this growing ambition, this desire for, power, recognition, and that's what will eventually lead him down a much darker path.
And this is where, if I'm remembering this right, this is where his universalism comes into play.
Exact.
His philosophical system.
Yes. So universalism, as Quisling imagined it, was supposed to be this grand unifying theory, like a way to bring all the world's religions together under a single system, spiritual laws, physical laws. On the surface, it sounds pretty noble, maybe even, I don't know, kind of utopian.
Right, like he was trying to, I don't know, create some sort of global harmony.
That's how he presented it, definitely. But universalism, well, it had a darker side. A much darker side. And it revealed some troubling aspects of Quisling's worldview.
Okay, so get into that. What was so troubling about his universalism?
At its heart, it was infused with really deeply racist and nationalistic ideas. Quisling, he truly believed in the inherent superiority of, the Nordic race.
Oh, wow.
And he saw universalism as a way to set up a, I guess you could say, global hierarchy with, with the Nordic people at the very top.
So not about unity then, but about imposing, I don't know, his own version of racial superiority.
Exactly. And this flawed ideology, it directly influenced his political goals. In 1933, he started the National Union Party, a far-right movement. And get this, it drew inspiration from the Soviet Communist Party.
Wait, wasn't he super anti-communist? It seems like a weird source of inspiration.
Yeah, and that's just it,
Yeah.
One of the many contradictions that makes Quisling such a puzzle. He admired how organized the communists were, their discipline. But of course, he totally opposed their ideology.
So he was like a borrower,
Mm.
willing to, take from anyone, even his enemies, if it meant getting power.
That's a good way to put it. And, despite his grand ambitions, his attempts to, copy what he thought worked, Quisling's political career, let's just say it was a flop. His party, I mean, it never really gained any traction with Norwegians. In elections, he barely scraped together 2% of the vote.
So we have this guy, undeniably smart, driven by, well, a deeply problematic vision, and yet failing to connect with, the very people he claimed to be fighting for.
Right. And as his political hopes kind of crumbled, his personal life started to unravel too. And this led to, well, let's just say some financial setbacks, some questionable decisions. And that shaped the course of his life in some pretty big ways.
Okay, so let's get into those personal troubles. Now, there's a story about a painting, right? Something about a valuable artwork being sold for next to nothing.
Ah, yes, the Dutch family saga. This is where Quisling's story gets almost, I don't know, comically ironic. It really shows his terrible judgment, at least when it came to anything outside, his intellectual pursuits.
So we were talking about Quisling and his, his financial problems and those bad decisions he made. What about this Dutch family painting? How did that all play out?
Well, Quisling, he liked the good life, nice things. He did inherit some wealth, but that lavish lifestyle and his writing career, which didn't exactly take off, it drained his resources. And then, to make matters worse, those artworks he got during his time in Russia, a lot of them turned out to be fakes.
Oh, no.
Yeah, he thought he had, like, original Goyas, Rembrandts, even Van Dyck's, a collection fit for a king, really, but they were basically worthless.
Ouch. Talk about a hit to, to the ego and the bank account.
Right. But here's the real kicker. He also had this painting called The Dutch Family. It was by Frans Hals, a pretty famous artist, but at the time, everyone thought it was just a copy, so he sold it for, I think it was around $4,000. I mean, that's not bad for a fake. Yeah, that's what he thought. But the painting, it ended up in the U.S., and art experts there, well, they took a closer look. And guess what? They declared it a genuine Hals, worth a whopping $100,000.
Oh, the irony.
Yeah.
The man who wanted to, change the world couldn't even recognize the real value of what he already had.
It does add a touch of tragic comedy to his story, right? And this pattern of bad judgment, missed opportunities, it wasn't just with his money, sadly. It extended to his political decisions, too, especially as the world entered this period of, well, events turmoil with the rise of Nazi Germany.
And that's where things take a darker turn.
Wow.
We know he admired Hitler, but how did that admiration actually show itself? What did he do?
It went beyond just, admiration. Quisling, he saw Hitler as this strong man, this decisive leader, and he actually believed that Norway, with its, democratic system, he thought it was weak, unprepared for the challenges of that time. Remember his fascination with how the Soviets did things.
Right.
He wanted that kind of control, that power to, really shape a nation.
So he thought Norway needed a fascist dictator, like its own version of Hitler.
Basically, yes. And he even sent Hitler a congratulatory note on his birthday, praising him, and I'm quoting here, for saving Europe from Jews and Bolshevism.
That's a chilling statement. It really shows his prejudices, his alignment with Nazi ideology.
It's a clear sign of how much Hitler had influenced him. And this brings us to December 1939. Quisling travels to Germany. He gets a meeting with Hitler himself.
The point of no return. What happened during that meeting? I'm really curious to hear this.
So Quisling, driven by this warped sense of patriotism and his belief in Hitler's vision, he makes a stunning proposal. He offers support for a potential German occupation of Norway.
He was really willing to just betray his country just like that.
I know, it seems crazy, right?
Yeah.
But we have to remember the context. Norway, with its coastline, access to the Atlantic, it was strategically crucial for Germany during the war. Hitler was already, looking at Norway, thinking about its potential.
So Quisling, by offering this collaboration, he thought he was being strategic.
Yeah.
Like a kingmaker, He thought he could somehow control things, negotiate favorable terms for Norway.
Yeah. That's the delusion he clung to. He convinced himself that, an alliance with Germany, it was inevitable, and that, somehow he could manipulate the situation, make it work for Norway's benefit.
That's where his ambition and his really messed up ideology, they came together, and the results, well, they were disastrous.
Exactly. And Hitler, when he got this offer, he took it seriously. Quisling even warned him that, Britain might be eyeing Norway too, which, just made Hitler even more determined to secure control.
So within months of this meeting, they launch Operation Weserübung, the invasion of Norway and Denmark. And Quisling, well, he's ready for his moment. He makes his move.
April 9th, 1940, German troops are storming ashore. Quisling takes over a radio station, and he makes this shocking announcement. He declares himself the leader of Norway, tells everyone to just, lay down their arms, welcome the invaders.
That's when his name, it became synonymous with traitor. It's surreal, that he tried to pull off a coup like on the radio. What was he thinking?
It was a bizarre move and ultimately pathetic. Quisling, he totally overestimated his popularity, his influence. The Norwegian people, they didn't welcome the Germans at all. They rallied around their king, Håkon VII, and this king, he refused to, to play along with this puppet government.
So Quisling's big plan, his plan to, usher in this new era for Norway, it backfired. spectacularly.
Yeah, it did. He was forced to, step down within days, humiliated, discredited. Even the Germans, I mean, they realized they'd overestimated him, too. They put in a new administrator to manage the occupation.
But he didn't just disappear, did he? Even after this humiliating defeat.
No. His thirst for power, his unwavering belief in his own destiny, it kept him in the game. He kept collaborating with the Nazis, hoping to get back into a position of authority. And 2 years later, 1942, he got his chance.
He's appointed minister-president, right?
Yeah.
Of this puppet government.
Yeah.
Still under German control, of course. So a second chance, a chance to put his vision for Norway into action, although not exactly how he originally pictured it.
Exactly. And he used this new authority to align Norway even more closely with Nazi ideology. He brought back laws that banned Jewish immigration, ordered the arrest of Jews, seizure of their property. He even tried to create a Norwegian version of the Hitler Youth.
It's chilling to see how quickly he embraced these horrific aspects of the Nazi regime.
It is. It's a stark reminder of how corrupting power can be, and the depths to which a man can sink when he's driven by, fanaticism, this lust for control. But even with this second chance, his relationship with the Nazi leaders, it was still complicated.
So you're saying he wasn't just, a mindless puppet. There were still tensions, power struggle.
Absolutely. He was always trying to prove how loyal he was to Hitler, hoping for validation, more autonomy. He even put together a volunteer military force to support the German war effort,
right,
trying to win favor.
So he was always on this tightrope, trying to balance his own ambitions with what his Nazi, I guess, overlords demanded of him.
That's a good way to put it, yeah. And as the war went on, as the tide started to turn against Germany, well, that tightrope, it became even more precarious. His fate, it was, tied to the fate of the Nazi regime, and things were about to unravel for both of them.
So last we left off, Quisling was walking that tightrope, trying to, keep the Nazis happy while still clinging to this idea that he was in control. But by 1945, the war was turning against Germany. What did that mean for Quisling? For his hold on Norway?
Well, the Allied forces were gaining ground, so the writing was on the wall. For the Nazis, and for anyone who collaborated with them, for Quisling, it meant that this illusion of control, this idea he'd clung to so tightly, it was about to be shattered. He actually tried to negotiate a treaty with Hitler, like one last attempt to save himself.
So even as the Nazi regime was, crumbling, he was still playing the game.
Yeah.
Trying to, secure some kind of future for himself, for Norway. On his own terms, of course.
Yeah, exactly. He thought he could leverage the situation, get Norway's independence in exchange for continued support. But the Nazis, I mean, they were facing defeat. They weren't interested in negotiating with a puppet who'd lost all credibility, and they became even more brutal in how they treated the Norwegian resistance.
And this is when we see those chilling photos. Quisling visiting mass graves, places where they dump the bodies of executed resistance fighters. There's one image, I can't get it out of my mind. He's just standing there in his suit, his hat, surrounded by this horrific scene. And he looks, emotional, almost like he's detached from what's happening around him.
It's a really haunting image. It captures the moral bankruptcy of his position. But even Quisling, as complicit as he was, he seemed to draw a line. When they ordered him to sign this decree authorizing the execution of resistance members, he refused.
Really? That's surprising. Almost like a flicker of conscience from a man who, seemingly lost his way. Do you think he felt any remorse? Or was it more about, holding on to some sense of control?
It's hard to say for sure. Maybe it was a realization finally of the horrors he'd helped to create, a tiny bit of humanity, or maybe, like you said, it was just defiance. One last way to assert himself, even though everything was falling apart.
Well, whatever the reason, it was too little, too late. By May of 1945, Norway was liberated, and Quisling he surrendered. The game was up.
The man who thought he'd be Norway's savior, he was now a prisoner, awaiting trial for his crimes. And his trial, which started in August of 45, it was a huge media event. I mean, people all over the world, they wanted to see this man, this symbol of treachery, face justice.
I can only imagine the drama that unfolded in the courtroom.
It was dramatic, full of, tension and unexpected turns. Quisling, he never stopped being the ideologue. He pleaded not guilty to everything, said his actions were, only to serve Norway's best interests.
So he was still clinging to this idea of patriotism, even when all the evidence pointed the other way.
Oh, absolutely. He even claimed that he didn't know about the atrocities in the concentration camps, even though there were tons of reports, testimonies. His defense, it was a mix of, I don't know, delusion, denial, and just this desperate attempt to rewrite history.
But those attempts to, change the narrative, they failed
Yeah.
because of the evidence they presented at the trial.
Yeah, they did. They had testimonies from German officials. They confirmed his role in the occupation, his efforts to suppress the resistance, his involvement in persecuting Norwegian Jews, and the way he acted during the trial, well, it didn't help him either.
What do you mean?
Well, people said he was evasive, prone to outbursts, and he often seemed, I don't know, detached from reality. It was as if the weight of his crimes, the realization that his vision had led to this utter ruin, it was finally hitting him. There's one moment from the trial that really sticks out.
Tell me about it.
A Holocaust survivor, Dr. Leo Eidinger, he testified. He described in detail his arrest, his deportation, what he saw at Auschwitz. It was so powerful. Such a contrast to Quisling's self-serving story.
Dr. Eidinger's testimony, it really showed the human cost of Quisling's betrayal.
Exactly. It showed the suffering, the unimaginable suffering that was inflicted on innocent people because of Quisling's choices.
So what was the verdict?
After weeks of, testimony and evidence, they found Quisling guilty on all charges, and he was sentenced to death. They executed him by firing squad. October 24th, 1945, at Akershus Fortress in Oslo.
In his final moments, did he show any remorse? Did he acknowledge what he'd done?
It depends on who you ask, but a lot of people say he maintained his innocence. Right up until the end, he held on to this belief that, that history would somehow prove him right, that he'd be remembered as a patriot.
What a tragic end to a life that started with so much promise. It's a reminder that, intelligence, ambition, when they're twisted by ideology and this hunger for power, they can lead to terrible things.
It really is. Quisling's name, it's still a symbol of betrayal, a reminder of the dangers of extremism, of collaborating with totalitarian regimes.
It makes you think, what can we learn from Quisling's story? It happened decades ago, but these themes, ambition, betrayal, the allure of dangerous ideologies, they feel relevant today.
You're absolutely right. His story, it reminds us to think critically, to question anyone who offers, simple solutions to complex problems, to be wary of those who exploit fear and prejudice, and to remember the courage of those who resisted Quisling, those who fought for freedom even when the odds were stacked against them.
Their stories, the stories of resistance and resilience, those are the stories we should remember, alongside the cautionary tale of Vidkun Quisling.
I agree. And maybe, most importantly, Quisling's story shows us how fragile democracy is, how we always need to protect it, guard it against those who would try to undermine it from within. That's a lesson that's a lesson for everyone, everywhere.
Thank you so much for taking us on this deep dive into the life of Vidkun Quisling.
Right.
It's a complicated story, a troubling story, but it leaves us with a lot to think about. And it reminds us of how important it is to be vigilant, to think critically, and to remember the strength of the human spirit.